Everyone, I too would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Bunurong Boonwurrung people. Welcome to Naarm for those of you who've travelled from out of the city. It is an absolute honour and pleasure to see all your beautiful, resplendent faces here to join us in the conversations that we're going to have for the next couple of days. I want to truly acknowledge you for showing up for this thing called Newkind, and for your commitment and your resilience to the embodiment of justice and equity in society. And I want you to really pay respects to yourselves and to each other, because every single one of you in the room here is a wealth of knowledge who works in these spaces, from gender equity, First Nations advocacy, ending poverty, race equity. And I really would like to ask you all to take the opportunity to learn from each other as much as we possibly can over the next couple of days. These kinds of platforms aren't given to us. This platform in particular was not given to me either. Maria was talking about how Newkind isn't a polished, fully funded enterprise. Little do you know, the very first Newkind 6 years ago, I was digging holes for toilet blocks on a property in Tasmania where we built a kitchen and a main stage out of salvaged scrap metal and wood so that we could hold these conversations. So make the most of this space, because we don't often get to speak as honestly as we will be able to the next couple of days. We are often bound by politeness, propriety, and today and tomorrow those bounds are no longer on us. I want to thank you for the love you have in your hearts that has drawn you to here as well, and to acknowledge that there is a loose molecular bond that has brought us together. This attractive force that has brought you here together is something I want to acknowledge. And that attractive force is your desire for peace and prosperity and justice in the world. And I'd like for that weak molecular bond to become fortified in the next couple of days through our conversations and our consultations, and reinforced in the field of service, so that we cannot be divided and disunited as we are working out in the field to create a better world. Over 170 years ago, while in exile under the oppressive rule of the Ottoman Empire, for the crime of calling for the oneness of humanity, the elimination of poverty and prejudice, calling for the equality of the genders, and the end to religious contention, Baha'u'llah said to the rulers of the world, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And still, 179 years later, those words have remained unheeded. And the devastation and destruction that we witness and experience in our world today continues unabated, because we have not spent long enough reflecting on the profound wisdom within those words. What on earth does unity have to do with ending poverty, violence, inequity, and injustice? We haven't spent long enough thinking about the implications of this principle of unity when designing initiatives for social change. And perhaps if we were to reflect on how our own human body would function if it was in disunity with itself, we might realize how critical this principle of unity actually is. The trouble is, we haven't yet convinced ourselves, our leaders, or even our children that we are in fact one body. We haven't really acknowledged and believed that quite yet. So we are acting in dissonance and disparity with one another. The swelling injustice and the growing inequity that we see around us, the abject poverty, hungry school children, incarceration of refugees, the unjust deaths of Aboriginal people in custody, and the fraying of the delicate fabric of our ecology, the loss of species and the looming threat of police violence against black bodies or the violence of nations against nations continues unabated. And it is enough to break any sane heart, any given moment. And yet, what makes it all that much more unbearable and heartbreaking is how completely and utterly unnecessary it all is. It is not required. No child needs to be hungry when they go to school. No child needs to work in a mine, mining precious metals in order to have enough to eat. No degree of violence is actually required to maintain peace and security. No ancient forest actually needs to be destroyed to create economic growth and jobs and prosperity. No pensioner needs to actually have to choose between paying their phone bill or their heating bill. No student needs to have to choose between paying their rent or buying their medications. And no country certainly needs to invade another country in order to secure the resources to maintain the standard of living of their constituents. All of this is completely and utterly unnecessary. We are a body that is acting in dysfunction with itself. Because we have not yet firmly established this underlying fundamental principle of the oneness of mankind and the unity of the human race. And by unity, I don't mean in a lovey-dovey, hold hands, esoteric kind of way. By unity, I mean in an ecological, scientific, quantum mechanics, social and economic policy kind of way. In a very real and tangible way, we have not yet fully acknowledged that we are in fact inseparable from one another and from the planet from which we have sprung. Every bit of inequity and injustice in this planet is an outcome of the fact that we are acting in disunity and disharmony with our own self. I want you to consider unity and oneness in the way that the entire planet functions as one unified whole. The way your body functions as one unified whole. The way all the water on the face of this planet functions as one unified whole. The way the Sahara Desert sends nutrients to the Amazon every year. The way the algae in the ocean provides most of the oxygen that you breathe. Unity is not something to strive for, to establish. Rather, it is a fundamental universal principle of life in this universe, and we are acting against that principle. And unfortunately, the imbalance, the injustice, the inequity, and the oppression have been going on for so long and unabated for so long that we have become accustomed to it. And we have come to believe that this is a natural way of the world and is part of our human nature, and unfortunately nothing could be further from the truth. There is no shortage of resources, or failing of human nature, or lack of technology, or inherent flaw in the design of this universe that requires any part of the human body to suffer for the rest to prosper. Our planet is inherently regenerative. Our spirits are inherently noble. Our nature as human beings is inherently compassionate, kind, loving, and generous. But it is fear, prejudice, and disunity that cause us to depart from our natural state and then become susceptible to greed, injustice, cruelty, and violence. And as a human race, we have departed from our natural state of being, and we need desperately to return to it. Because justice is not simply a prerequisite for unity, nor is it just simply a function of a civil society. Justice is a natural law of the universe and a reflection of the attribute of the Creator. Justice is not something we have to construct or invent. It is an essence and a virtue that actually exists in the very essence and fabric of your soul. Justice can be denied and it can be obscured, but it can never be lost or forgotten. Even as children, we understand justice. And no matter how many layers of materialism or ego or fear or prejudice we layer upon our souls, justice is still there, regardless of the insulation we have placed upon it. It is our natural equilibrium towards which our social ecosystem is moving. Our whole planet is moving towards this. It is the desire of our world to move towards it. And this is what Dr. Martin Luther King was alluding to when he said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We need to keep this in sight and not lose sight of the fact that we are on a trajectory and everything in existence is pushing us towards that eventual goal of the unification of the human race and its peace and prosperity. And while we act in disunity and disharmony and discord, even the very ecology that has supported our life is now responding to that disunity and forcing us to come to terms with the fact that we are in fact inseparable. Climate change is an outcome of our disunity and an economic and social system that was designed on superiority and exclusion. And climate change is also ushering us towards the final realization that actually we can't solve this issue until we do resolve those underlying issues of unity in the first place. There is a process that we are on that starts with truth, moves towards justice. Justice allows us to have unity. Unity then allows peace, and peace is then what leads to prosperity. And I want you to keep an eye on that trajectory that we are on and to never lose sight of that, because it can be very easy to lose ourselves in the darkness of this world today. And we cannot achieve those things out of that order either. To strive for prosperity as an individual invites ego, materialism, and self-righteousness. To strive for prosperity as a nation invites nationalism, war, and conflict and contention. To expect unity in the absence of justice is oppression with a smile. And to strive for peace without unity is fragile and brittle. The discussion panel that we're going to start this conference with is titled Truth, Voice, and Treaty. But I don't want us to imagine that that is where it ends either. And the discussion panel hosted by Maria, with Commissioner Suad Hunter, my friend Phil Saunders and Lewis Brown, will hopefully touch on what we will be striving for beyond the establishment of a voice to Parliament and a treaty on these lands, and what vision it is that we need to keep in mind so that we can keep our trajectory straight. And to fight against inequity as if it were a war is the very type of thinking that caused inequity in the first place. And to imagine that some of us are inherently morally upright and others are morally bankrupt, and that some of us have got the answers and the other ones don't and they're depraved, is the very type of superiority that justified terra nullius, slavery, colonization, and stolen generations. And to attempt to fix the symptom of an illness without understanding the underlying root causes is like a doctor trying to heal a disease by addressing a symptom. And that is not how a skilled physician would try to heal an ailment in your body. And what is now required of us is for us as individuals to become skilled physicians and to keep in mind the body of humanity is the patient that is sick. And what are the underlying root causes of this illness that we see in our planet? Of poverty, violence, war, conflict over resources, prejudice. And once we reflect on this body of humanity and understand its inextricable interconnectedness and its inability to reach peace and prosperity individually, as nations, as communities, as groups, only then can we come to the solutions that we require as a human race. And one of the things that breaks my heart, just as much as how unnecessary all of this is, the inequity that we experience in our world, is the fact that we have not even begun to scratch the surface of human capacity and capability on the face of this planet. We think that we are this far away from the peak of human civilization, and I tell you, we don't even know what we don't know of what we are capable of, because we have not yet resolved those basic issues of prejudice, violence, sexism, and racism. We are still functioning within a system that was designed several centuries ago, and we are still acting and behaving within those principles as a civilization. The other day, I watched a video of a European man who had created an art piece, a performance piece, and there's a set of stairs and a trampoline, and he walks a couple of steps up this set of stairs, and he falls onto the trampoline and back up to the stairs, and walks a couple of steps up on the stairs and falls on the trampoline again, and he does this for, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 minutes. It's a performance piece of the stairs and trampolines, and it gathers a crowd, and he makes a living, and he's become a viral hit with this trampoline stair scenario. And I saw that and I wondered, oh, the things we could do if we didn't have to deal with systemic racism. The things I could go out there and do if I didn't have to deal with systemic racism. Because there are certain things that are only available and accessible to certain segments of society because they are not dealing with the constant threat of violence against their bodies, prejudice in the workplace, prejudice in policy, incarceration unjustly in detention centres, and their children being lynched on the way home from school. And each and every one of the injustices and the social justice issues that we are separately involved in, youth work, gender equality, ending violence, poverty, homelessness, all of these things, we cannot resolve until we address the underlying injustice that we are building our lives upon here in this country. Because as I said, we can't have justice without truth, and the truth is we are living on stolen, unceded lands of the First Nations people of this continent, and we have no right to be working, raising families and retiring, buying and selling property and profiting from it, whilst we have not yet established justice for the First Nations people of this continent. It is not possible to build justice on a foundation of injustice. And this is why at Newkind we always centre the voices of First Nations leaders, academics and activists, not just in the opening panel, but throughout the entire conference, because this is still their country and we are still squatters on this land. And some of us have forgotten that we are visitors. With that, I would like for you to keep these ideas in mind for the next couple of days, of the systems thinking approach to social justice and social change that requires for us to acknowledge that the human race is one inseparable body and we cannot achieve peace or prosperity for any part of it separately from the other. And two, for those of us who live and work on these lands, that we cannot separate our movements from the sovereignty movement of the First Nations people of this continent. We cannot think that we can achieve that while the other thing happens separately to us. And by keeping those in mind for the next 2 days, I hope to be able to inspire you with new pathways, new connections, new ideas, and new ways in which we can create a peaceful, just, equitable, prosperous society for all of us in this country and on this planet. So again, thank you all for showing up to Newkind Social Justice Conference. You cannot imagine how much it means to me that you have given your time to be here. Of all of the places you could have been on a Monday morning, you are here to discuss these most challenging and complex issues, and for that, I love you. Thank you for being here. I look forward to speaking with you soon.